In this video, we are going to be simplifying, multiplying, and dividing rational functions. When we do this, we need to do the same thing do the same thing every time. And the first thing we need to do is factor everything. And if you don't factor first, you're going to get a really bad grade on this quiz and test. Factoring has to happen first. The second thing is you're going to state the domain. Now, you're not always going to have to state the domain, but when you do, you want to do that after you factor. And then the third thing is going to be to simplify. And if you follow in that order each time, you'll be more successful than if you were to not. Okay, so step one, factor. So the numerator, that's a difference of squares, and I can factor that to x plus 2, x minus 2. On the bottom, it's a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So when I factor that, the two numbers that multiply to negative 10 and add to 3 would be positive 5 and negative 2. Okay, so the domain. The domain is anything that is going, well, let me take this back. The domain is always going to be all real numbers. Oops, except real doesn't start with an A. All real numbers, okay? But there's going to be an exception. And to find the exception, we have to set the bottom equal to 0. So over here, I get x is negative 5, and here I get 2. So the domain is going to be all real numbers, except x cannot be negative 5 and positive 2. Well, why is that? Well, the reason is if you plugged in a negative 5 or a positive 2, it would make the denominator 0, and you cannot divide by 0. So anything works except those numbers. So that's how we're going to write the domain. All right, now we need to simplify. When you're doing these problems, you can simplify if a group matches. Well, what do I mean by a group? A group is something in parentheses. So I've got an x plus 2 and an x plus 5. Those definitely don't simplify. But x minus 2's, they can cancel out because I can take out the whole group. I cannot just cancel these x's because they're part of a group and you can't break up a group. So my final answer is going to be x plus 2 over x minus 5. All right, let's try this again on number 2. So first I need to factor the top. So the 2, it's a trinomial, the leading coefficient of 1. Two numbers that multiply to 1 and add to 2 would be 1 and 1. On the bottom, when I have to factor that, first I got to take out a greatest common factor. So I'm going to do that first over here. Now I need two numbers that multiply to negative 3 and add to 2. So that's going to be negative 3 and positive 1. So first I factored. Second, state the domain. So when I state the domain, I'm going to put all real numbers except x cannot equal anything that makes the denominator 0. So here, what would make this 0 is 0. What would make this 0 is positive 3. What would make this 0 is negative 1. So it's all real numbers except x. It can't equal 0, 3, and negative 1. Okay, now that I've stated the domain, the second step is to simplify. So these are a matching group. They cancel out. X plus 1 and x minus 3 is not a matching group. It can't cancel out. Now x over here, it's an individual. And if there is another single x, then the single x's can cancel, but an x can't break up a group. So my final answer is going to be x plus 1 over x times x minus 3. Okay, two things to point out. One is, notice at the bottom, I did not distribute that x and multiply it back out. I left it, I just kind of put it together. I left it factored. Okay, the second thing is when there's just one group, like on this first one, on example 1, there's just x plus 2 at the top. When there's just a single group, you don't have to write the parentheses. When there's more than one grouping or individual, you do have to write the parentheses. Okay, let's try this one more time on number 3. So step 1, factor. So on the top, that factors to x plus 6, x minus 6, because it's the difference of squares. On the bottom, the two numbers that multiply to 24 and add to negative, or multiply to negative 24 and add to 2 would be 6 and 4. So it's going to be x minus 6, x plus 4. First step is to factor. Second, state the domain. So it's going to be all real numbers except x cannot equal. Well, positive 6 would make that 0, and negative 4 would make that 0. So it's all real numbers except for negative 6 and 4. Now we're going to simplify, so we can only cancel if the groups match exactly. So those cancel. So my final answer is going to be x plus 6 over x plus 4. All right. Now, these, I changed it so we didn't have to find the domain, but I forgot to take it out of the directions. So on these, all we're going to do is find the product. Product means to multiply. So the same thing is going to work even though we have two fractions now instead of one fraction. Still, you have to factor first. We're not staying in the domain, so then we simplify. But on number 1, if there's no pluses and minuses, you can't factor it. So it just is what it is. You can simplify by simplifying up and down or at a diagonal. What you can't do is simplify left and right. So the x to the 4s, those cancel out. The 4 and 8, those would reduce. So on the top, all we have left is a 2, and on the bottom, all we have left is an x, or 1x, which is just x. Okay, let's try this again on number 2. So let's deal with the numbers first. So you can simplify it an angle or a diagonal or up and down, but not left and right. So 10 and 25, I can divide by 5. 6 and 12, I can divide by 6. Okay, so I'm going to start this. 2 times 2 is 4, and 1 times 5 is 5. Now, let's see if we can figure this out without scratching a bunch of stuff up here. There's 2 W's on the top and 1 W on the bottom. So let's have a visual. Okay? Well, we can only cancel 1 for 1. So if I cancel, I've just got 1 W on the top. Okay, with the Y's, there's no magic order to do this in. With the Y's, okay, I just realized there's a variable missing. There's supposed to be a Y here. With the Y's, I have 3 here and 2 on the bottom. So if there's 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom, I cancel and I just get 1 at the top. Now, do you need to write that out each time? Absolutely not. But you need to just visualize that in your head. And I think if most people visualize it, then you don't need to write it out. Okay, with the x's, there's 2 on the top and 3 on the bottom. So when I cancel, I'm going to have 1x left. But since there was more on the bottom to start with, that 1x that's left is on the bottom. With the z's, there's 2 on the top and 4 on the bottom. So when I cancel, I'm going to have 2 z's left. And because there's more on the bottom, those 2 z's are going to be on the bottom. And that's your answer. Okay, so number 3, we're just going to be finding the product. So first step is to factor. Do you see all those parentheses there? That means it is factored. There's nothing left for you to do. All you need to do is to go straight to the simplifying. And you can simplify if your groups match. So the z's plus 1s, they cancel. The z plus 4, they cancel. But no other groups match exactly, and you can't break up a group. So to write your final answer on the top, I'm going to put z plus 6 times z minus 5. And on the bottom, I'm going to have z minus 6 times z plus 3. Note that I did not multiply those out, number 1. And number 2, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, because there's more than one group, I left it in parentheses. All right, let's try this again on number 4. So first step, you got to factor. So when I factor the top, the 2 numbers that multiply to 11 and add to 12 would be 11 and 1. So I have b plus 1, b plus 11. On the bottom, that's a difference of squares, b plus 3, b minus 3. On the top, b plus 9, that doesn't factor, so it's its own group. If there's a plus in there, it creates that group. On the bottom, the numbers that multiply to 99 and add to 20 would be 9 and 11. So I factored. Now I can simplify, and I can cross out matching groups. So the b plus 11 can go, and the b plus 9 can go. So on the top, I just have the one group left, b plus 1, so I don't have to write it in parentheses because it's only one group. On the bottom, I have 2 groups left, so I do have to write it in parentheses, but I'm not going to multiply it out. All right, let's try this again on number 5. Now, number 5, that x plus 4 squared, it is kind of factor, but what might be helpful, if you square something, aren't you writing it, multiplying it by itself? If we write it like that, it might be easier to see. Okay, and I'm going to run out of room, so I'm going to write it down here. This is going to help us when we simplify. Okay, x squared minus 16, that factors to x plus 4, x minus 4. Over here, it's a trinomial, multiplies to 14 and adds to negative 9, would be negative 7 and negative 2. Over here, trinomial with leading coefficient of 1, multiplies to negative 28 and adds to negative 3, would be negative 7 and 4. So now that it's factored, now I can cancel matching parentheses. So x plus 4 canceled. X plus 4 cancels again, but I can only cancel 1 for 1. And the x minus 7 canceled. On the top, I get x minus 2, and on the bottom, I get x minus 4. Okay, number 6, I can tell there's an x missing because I need to be able to factor it correctly. Okay, so on this one, to factor it, I need to first start, I know I got to take out a greatest common factor here. So I'm going to do that. This has got to be squared. Okay, I apologize. This worksheet didn't transfer into OneNote very well. 4x minus 12. Okay, so now when I factor it, that x is going to be there, and then multiplies to negative 12 and adds to negative 4 would be minus 6 and plus 2. On the bottom, I have x minus 2. Over here, this is a difference of squares, so I have x plus 2, x minus 2. Down here, this does not factor, so I get 3x cubed. I know it doesn't factor because there's no plus or minus signs. It's just an individual term. It's a monomial. You can't factor a monomial. Okay, so let's see what I can reduce. Well, the x minus 2's, they can cancel because I can cancel a diagonal or I can cancel up and down. So since I can cancel a diagonal and up and down, I cannot cancel the x plus 2's because they're left and right. So that's looking at the groups. But that x that's over here on the top left and the 3x cubed that's at the bottom, those are individuals. Those can cancel. So I can cancel this out, and I've got 2 x's left. Because think about that. Wouldn't that be 1x on the top and 3 on the bottom? Yeah? Okay. So let's see if we can write our final answer. So at the top, I have x minus 6, and then I have x plus 2, x plus 2. When I have 2 of the same thing, isn't that x plus 2 squared? On the bottom, I'm left with 3x squared. These squareds, they don't cancel. Squaring something different. Okay, so last thing is we got to find the quotient. The quotient is a division problem, and it works the exact same way as the product, except this time you've got to flip the right fraction, just like when you did with fractions, which is numbers. So we have 10m cubed over 7n squared times, flip the second one, 14n cubed goes on the top, 25m squared goes on the bottom. Again, you can simplify to diagonal or up and down, but not left and right. 10 and 25, that reduces. I can divide it by 5. 7 and 14, I can divide by 7. So on the top, 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 5 is 5. Now with the variables, same thing as we did before. There's 3 m's on the top and 2 on the bottom, so we cancel and get 1 on the bottom. With the n's, there's 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom. We cancel and get 1 on the top. And that's our answer. Okay, let's try this again on number 2. So first I have to rewrite it as a multiplication problem, and then I can simplify. Okay, so as I'm doing this, let's just work our way through it, one variable at a time. With the a's, there's 4 on top, 1 on the bottom. I cancel, get 3 on the top. B's, 1 on the top, 2 on the bottom, cancel, get 1 on the bottom. C's, 3 on the top, 2 on the bottom, cancel, get 1 on the top. G's, I've got 1 extra on the top. H's, they all go away. That's my final answer. Okay, 2 more where you have to factor, and then we're done. On number 3, when I factor this, the two numbers that multiply to 16 and add to 8 would be 4 and 4. On the bottom, this one factors two numbers that multiply to 9 and add to negative 6 would be negative 3 and negative 3 times. These don't look like they factor, but they do. Think about that. The first step in factoring is greatest common factor. What's its greatest common factor? 3. So I take that out. Over here on the top, this factors, I can take out a 2. Remember, I'm factoring and flipping the second one at the same time. Okay, groups can cancel. So the a minus 3's can cancel. The a plus 4's can cancel. And individuals can reduce. If 3 and 2 were reducible, I could. Now I'm going to write as my final answer, which is going to be 3 times a plus 4 over 2 times a minus 3. Last one. I know I got to take out an x here, so I'm going to do that first. And I got to take out an x here. Now I'm more ready to factor. So on the top, two numbers that multiply to negative 2 and add to 1 would be x plus 2, x minus 1. On the bottom, multiply to 6 and add to 5 would be 2 and 3 times. Now remember, this denominator down here is moving to the top. So multiplies to 12 and adds to 7 would be 3 and 4. And this numerator now moves to the bottom, so you write your x first. Multiplies to negative 12 and adds to 1 would be 4 and negative 3. Okay, cross out matching ones. The 2's can go. First, I'm just looking at groups. X plus 3's can go. X plus 4's can go. So those are the matching groups. Now I can look at individual. There's one x on top and one x on the bottom. Well, those can cancel too. So on the top, I get x minus 1, and on the bottom, I get x minus 3. That's it.